dear Rector Ignatov, dear President Mikhailov, dear Prime Minister Kubilius, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear students of AHU, it's a great pleasure to be here at the European Humanities University, which every single time impresses us not only with its location, but also with the bright minds and hearts that are gathered here and are willing to embrace the liberal arts education and to embrace also the knowledge beyond the borders of their countries, beyond the borders of their minds, and indeed to discuss issues which are pertinent for Europe and the world. And I congratulate your ambition today to discuss European Parliament elections. Very important subject indeed, and I hope we'll have a very vibrant discussion. It is indeed the year of definition for European Union, 2019. And I would say also this time it's different. This time is different not only because of all of the challenges that the rector so clearly presented to us, but also because I think for the first time since inception of the European Union, and for the first time since the direct elections of the European Parliament in 1979, we will have a genuinely European election. For the first time in many countries, especially in the founding member states, in France and Germany and in Italy, as well as in the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg, but also in the new member states, you will have a lot of debate about Europe, a lot of naked, difficult sometimes, controversial, but real debate about Europe, where Europe is heading, what kind of vision it needs to take upon itself, how we as citizens and governments approach it, more or less integration, more or less global ambition, and in which areas Europe has to deliver better and more efficiently, and where not, and where perhaps the member states should do and take back initiative. So moreover, I think the turnout this time, we'll see, but my feeling is will be slightly higher than usual, simply because everyone is a bit more mobilized on all sides, on both the pro-European or the people that want to save European project side, but also, of course, on the side of the rising radical, sometimes nationalistic, and revisionist forces that are also on the rise all across Europe. So it's really interesting time, and it's super interesting to discuss European Parliament, the institution which at the same time seems far and close to us. For many citizens, it looks very distant, sometimes very difficult to understand. Sometimes also it seems that it does not matter much for our daily lives. And in fact, on all those counts, it's not true. And I can tell that with big confidence because I myself worked in that institution for 11 years, mostly as diplomatic advisor to two former presidents and two former great friends of this university, Jerzy Buzek and Martin Schulz. And I saw this institution as one of the most interesting and exciting parliaments in the world, and definitely the most unique parliament in the world. Where else you can find an institution with 751 members hailing from 28 member states, and still will be 28 member states with these elections in the end of May, working in 24 official languages, coming from 100 national parties, yet managing to regroup themselves in 8 European political families, and every single day, every single moment trying to work towards European compromise, the spirit of dialogue and cooperation. Where else you can find such a parliament? And a parliament which could have a legally binding decisions, not on one member state, but on 28, unique in all senses, not only in terms of budget, not only in terms of our trade agreements and international accords, but also on the questions which are so much a part of our daily life. And to those who tell you that European Parliament doesn't impact their lives and therefore it's not necessary to go to vote, you can tell them immediately that they are completely wrong. You know, in 2 years, all of us will feel the decision of the European Parliament just a few weeks ago to ban the single-use plastics by 2021, right? Every single of us will be impacted by that and will change our habits in daily lives, the way we approach environment, the way we approach sustainable living, and the way we approach the use of single-use plastics. Every single of us in this room were affected last year in May, including Prime Minister Kubilius, I'm sure, by the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which changed everyone's lives, not only businesses and the big global enterprises and internet giants, but every single individual had to improve our own hygiene, digital hygiene, and to become much more serious about our privacy of data and about the way we treat the data in our daily and professional lives. Again, regulation which was European, and a decision which was a joint decision by European Parliament and the Council under the proposal of the European Commission. Or, for instance, the mobility package, which at the moment is causing so much outcry in Lithuania, in many other Eastern and Central European member states, adopted just a few weeks ago by European Parliament with a record 1,300 amendments. Who could say that the decision of the European Parliament does not impact directly the lives of the European citizens, the businesses, and the debate on the ground? So to all of those skeptics who tell you, don't matter what the European Parliament says, this institution does not do anything, you can tell them, look more carefully and be better informed. And here indeed we have a paradox, that while Lithuanians, and not only Lithuanians, but most of European Union member states' citizens, in fact, trust European institutions more than they trust their national institutions. In Lithuania, the numbers are dramatic. European Parliament and European Commission is more popular 4 times than the national parliament and the national government. In other countries, it's a bit less of a difference, but still, European institutions are more popular, yet people know much less about them. And maybe that's the reason why the national authorities are so much criticized, because they are closer to the people, they're better known, and they touch on the really very painful and important issues like tax, education, health and social policy. But it is, I think, a paradoxical thing that while we trust European institutions, we don't deliver that trust by turning out in bigger numbers to vote and by learning more what these institutions actually do, what decisions they take, and that they are not the institutions which are foreign, but that they are our institutions. European institutions are our institutions, European budget is our budget, and the decisions made there are our decisions. I think this is a very important point to make as we start today's discussion. Second thing which I wanted to mention is that with the rise of populism indeed and the radical ideas all across Europe, we sometimes get distracted by that and tend just to talk about that as the main issue at these elections, which for me is slightly sad because, and probably unavoidable, because it is indeed a phenomenon. But for me, European Parliament elections is a moment, really, not only to remember the origin and the goal of the European Union, but also to discuss its future. When else than at the European elections? Like with the national elections, this is the moment, the definition moment when everyone comes out and makes clear their ideas about the future of the EU. And it is indeed the moment now, 70 years, more than 70 years after World War II, and more than 60 years after the Rome Treaty was established, to remember that European Union was at the origin of the peace project and the visionary idea of Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman to unite 2 instruments of war, coal and steel, in order to create one single instrument of peace, that of European integration. To really make France and Germany so interdependent economically that they would never ever think of fighting each other in the future. And give me an example where EU member states, after joining the European Union, have had a war between themselves. It hasn't happened. Hasn't happened. Europe has had wars since the European Union came to existence, in the Balkans and now in Ukraine, which is still continuing, but never inside of the European Union, because the European Union is going against the inertia of human spirit and human nature to use force and cohesion in getting your self-interest defended. It goes against this inertia and has replaced the tools of power, of force, of cohesion by the tools of dialogue, of compromise, and by the power of argument and ideas. I think this is very important to remember also today as we approach European elections. It's also important to note, and probably Prime Minister Kubilius will agree with me because he knows too well what crisis means, that the European Union has always been the history of crisis. Going from crisis to crisis, as Winston Churchill once said, without losing enthusiasm. Without losing enthusiasm and without losing, indeed, unity. And even the World War II was the example where, indeed, from the worst type of nightmare in the world's history, we emerged as European peace project. So we did in the last few crises. Look at the last decade. After 2008, 2009, global financial crisis, instead of surrendering to that crisis and risking the collapse of the Eurozone, we fought back. We created the banking union. We created European semester. We created a European stability mechanism. We helped in a very difficult way for Greece to get out of the historically biggest ever in the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis. And Greece, since last year, is growing again. Since last year, again can borrow in the capital markets, and even is showing leadership on some of the international issues, like resolving the problem of the name with North Macedonia and allowing that country finally, after 27 years, to approach European integration and membership in NATO. After 2015 migration crisis, which Mr. Rector has evoked, again we had a chance, perhaps, to surrender, to risk the collapse of the Schengen zone and the external security of our borders. But we fought back. We fought back. We created European Coast and Border Guard, now with the ambition to increase it to 10,000 patrol by 2027, the proposal by Jean-Claude Juncker, which has just been approved by the member states. We have tripled the budget and the capacity of Frontex, the agency based in Warsaw, to deal with external border security. We have sent military missions to the Mediterranean Sea, Sophia, Triton, and Poseidon, not only to fight the illegal migration routes there, but also to save lives, to remember the humanitarian heart of the European Union. And by now, 600,000 people were saved from dying in the Mediterranean Sea. Lithuania is also participating there already with the 3 brigades which were sent in that mission. Finally, Brexit, the newest of our crises, which again probably in many ways risked the beginning or the end of the European Union. In 2016, June, after the referendum, many of us were saying, my goodness, will it not in many ways result in escalation, in domino effect, with other countries perhaps following the suit of the United Kingdom and organizing similar referendum. What happened? Nothing of that sort. In fact, paradoxically, instead of dividing us, Brexit united us. The rest, 27 countries, were negotiating those 2 years in a very difficult negotiations with the United Kingdom with a discipline I have never seen in the European Union. There was not a single other topic, and not a single other file, not a single other policy in the existence of the European Union that made European Union member states so united as Brexit, in order to defend not only citizens' rights, financial obligations, or indeed the peace in Ireland through the backstop agreement on Northern Irish border, but I think more fundamentally to defend European Union project from collapse, to defend the integrity of internal market, and not to allow it to be compromised by any concessions that would endanger the functioning of the biggest and the most successful single market in the world. So in trouble, in misery, in conflict, in war, in crisis, we usually as Europeans, we become better. We become more united, we become stronger, and sometimes even we manage to show our best colors. Does it mean that we always need a crisis to consolidate? Does it mean that we always need a crisis to understand the value of the European Union? Does it mean that we always need a crisis to move forward? I hope not. I hope that these elections, 2019, could be the moment where we, as European Union, start being not only reactive, but also proactive. Start being not only crisis caretaker, but also much more strategic in our decisions, in being able to foresee certain trends and to prepare them better. Why? Because I think European Union has a demand, not only by European citizens, who are often frustrated by the European Union, but they're frustrated because they either lack action in certain areas or they want it to be better, more democratic, and more accountable. So there's a clear demand from the citizens, 62% overall in the European Union that support the European consensus for European Union, that want Europe to survive and to do better. But also, I would say globally, increasingly there is a demand for European action. And I see at least 5 areas where that's necessary. First, it's global trade. In the current age of global wars, trade wars, and in current age of cracks in international system, and in the review of such carefully crafted post-Cold War system of rules and norms, European Union is pretty much a sole actor that is trying to preserve it, to preserve the world of predictability, to preserve the world of reciprocity, to preserve the world of openness, to preserve the world of cooperation and not confrontation in terms of trade. And instead of engaging in trade wars, European Union is accelerating trade talks with pretty much everyone in the world. In the last 2 years, not only the talks have been finished with Canada and Japan, but also the talks are ongoing and progressing with Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, Mercosur, Mexico. You probably won't find a place in the world where European Union negotiators are not on the ground working towards fair and free trade agreements. Euro, with 20-year history, has clearly become the second most important not only reserve currency, but also currency in terms of payments in the world. And despite all the criticism that it has encountered in this 20-year turbulent history, the euro is there to stay. We have to remember that. So Europe has incredibly strong credentials to be a leader in terms of global trade. Second area, security and defense. Well, of course, NATO is playing the major role, but European Union is called upon increasingly to do better and to do more. And here I'm talking about the creation of European Defense Fund, another idea of President Juncker, already a reality, approved by member states, with the first 500 million euros dedicated. And in the future, we hope in the future budget to have about 5 billion euros annually for not only joint investment in defense and defense research and innovation, but also for the future possible mutual acquisitions in order to improve our coordination, in order to improve our better spending in defense. Historical, revolutionary, I would say, advancement, very much welcomed also by NATO, because NATO has been very upset with Europeans not only spending not enough, but also not coordinating their spending and not doing it in a much more efficient way. The PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation in terms of military, also is advancing with 17 concrete projects, again very much supported by NATO. One of them is military mobility, very important for Baltic region and Poland, where a total of investment of 6 billion euros will be used in the next budget to improve infrastructure, roads, viaducts and bridges for the military hardware to pass better in the territory of allied countries, both EU and NATO. Or indeed another project which is led by Lithuania, by this country, a creation of the Cyber Rapid Reaction Forces, so that we are better prepared in the future to come to help any member state that might experience a massive cyber attack anywhere in Europe. Things which were unthinkable just a couple of years ago are happening as we speak. And these are serious, real, practical projects and not some kind of romantic ideas about European army. This is something which is happening as we speak and which is happening in close and the closest possible coordination with NATO. Third area, climate change. Of course, there Europe is indispensable. Indispensable not only in saving and safeguarding the Paris Climate Change Agreement, but also in showing the example. Not only with plastics. Plastics is only the first step. We need to change our way of being in every single area if we want to avert what the UN scientists have predicted, that in 12 years we might not avoid the global climate catastrophe. We have only 12 years to get our act together in order really to make sure that this planet will not only inherit it from our grandparents, but that we leave it also for our grandchildren. European Union leadership there is essential. The fourth area, and I'm sure also Prime Minister will like that area, it's technology and innovation, where we are having in the European Union some of the best universities in the world, some of the brightest people and students in the world, including in this university, but where we are really lacking behind globally in terms of investment in innovation, in terms of science and research, and where we are eclipsed not only by the United States, but also by China. If in 2006, out of the 10 top companies, only one was high-tech. Today, 7 are high-tech, 5 are digital, and none of the 10 are from Europe. All of them are from the United States and from China. So if the European Union doesn't get its act together, we will lose in this global competition, for not only for minds and brains, but also for innovation. And therefore, the European Commission provokes the governments, the parliaments, to think much more creatively in the approaching and already happening negotiations on the future EU budget, to really spend much more on the areas of future economy rather than to revert to the old habits of overspending on common agricultural policy or cohesion. In this budget proposal, we have for the first time dedicated 100 billion euros for the famous Horizon Europe program, the signature European Union science and research instrument. We have dedicated 9.2 billion for Digital Europe, which we hope will also help investments in innovations in terms of artificial intelligence and digitalization. And we hope that the member states, including Lithuania, will take this challenge, will understand that this investment is much more important for Europe if we look 100 years in advance than the traditional spending that often is not creating the added value that we all want. And the last and final thing where I think European Union needs to do better and to do more, and where it is creating and needs to create the public global good, is of course democracy and freedom. I put it last, but I think it's the most important. Today in the world where we're experiencing 13 years of constant decline of democracy globally, according to Freedom House, with increasingly more and more not only authoritarian states appearing, but also the so-called illiberal democracies, where even in the European Union itself, we have attacks against freedom of speech, attacks against independence of judiciary, attacks against the functioning rule of law system. European Union needs to get better and needs to get its act together, because who else, if not the European Union, will defend the principles which created the existence of the European Union? Without these fundamentals, we will not be there. Human rights, freedom of speech, and of course, rule of law. So I think it's quite a large already challenge that I created for Europe to take in the next elections, including, of course, not forgetting the Eastern Partnership area and region, where if Europe wants to succeed, it needs to make sure that it doesn't import instability from its neighborhood, both East and South, but that it exports both stability, predictability, and economic welfare to the closest of our neighbors. And here the future of Eastern Partnership, I think, is directly linked to these global European ambitions. And there we will need everyone's help, not only Lithuanians, which is one of the leading brainstormers of European Union in Eastern Partnership, and one of the persons you have here who is full of ideas in terms of getting much more investment in return for reform in Ukraine, but also elsewhere. But it's also up to the European Union and Eastern Partnership member states to really renew the partnership, to rethink it, to make it much more creative, much more modern, and much more appealing to the citizens. Already we have 20 concrete deliverables which we agreed last year in Brussels, which speak specifically about specific issues which might be interesting to the citizens. After the visa-free regimes, which were implemented in Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, which hopefully in the future will be also enjoyed by other Eastern Partnership member states, including Belarus, we have to go to more areas where we can cooperate, like roaming prices, Yeah, and I experienced myself while going to those countries that it's 100 difference. It's better not to allow your data being roamed in either Belarus or Ukraine, because then you have a huge telephone bill when you come back. Roaming, which could indeed make those borders disappear much quicker, as well as a digital single market, all of those investments in digital infrastructure and Wi-Fi, that could be an area of future cooperation. Indeed, possibly the Connecting Europe facility, in introducing and expanding our finance also for infrastructure projects in Eastern Partnership, for us to be better interconnected physically, but also definitely much more investment in science, in education, in exchange, creating the network of European universities, expanding the Erasmus Plus programs in all Eastern Partnership countries, so that the new generation is able to communicate in different languages, but in the same language of European values and identity. So with that, I think I will conclude, because Maximas will kill me for speaking too long. And I hope that in our discussion today we'll be able to see how these European Parliament elections could help us to achieve these goals, and how we as citizens of Europe, EU or non-EU, can help European Union to rediscover its vision, to rediscover its goal, to build its new leadership, and to make its communication much better. When now, if not? And I hope indeed that this time it's different. Thank you.